Welcome back. I am here ready to give you the Sarasota and Manatee County market breakdown on my Russell recap, taking into account everything that happened in the beginning part of 2026. And if you recall, and if you've watched previous episodes, you know a couple things about these recaps is number one, I talk for a really long time and I give you a lot of charts and graphs and numbers. So if that's your thing, you'll really find this informative. And number two, I also like to talk a little bit about my business personally before I get started. And where I'm coming from today is just a profound sense of gratitude that no matter what the market is doing, whether it's challenging, whether it's a little bit easier, whether it's fast or slower, I'm so grateful to work in a beautiful place like Sarasota, and I'm so grateful for all the clients and customers that I have that have made this a great business. And ultimately, our aim here is to serve you, which is why I put the time in to create all this information that might help you with your next buying or selling decision. In the first quarter of 2026, I was optimistic on my last video, if you watched it, and we produced actually almost $20 million in volume, which would probably be close to one of our better first quarters ever. So we feel super grateful again that we've had a great first quarter and lots of exciting things coming up. Have some really great waterfront properties, some really great boutique listings, lots of great buyers we're working with. So overall, we're making progress in a market that is still a bit sticky and challenging. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. You can see on this slide, it's a lot to digest, but this is a slide that goes basically from March of 2022, which may have been the statistical peak of the COVID market. You can actually see if you look all the way at the far side of the graph that the amount of sales was higher than the amount of listings that existed at the time. So we were like in a negative supply scenario, which was insane. And if you fast forward 4 years to 2026, you can see a completely different looking graph, but some very encouraging numbers. And so there's just a few things that I want to highlight about this graph. The first thing I would say is that this March of 2026, which is the most recently finished month that we have statistics for, we had the highest amount of pending sales on record. And so we had over 1,500 pending sales, which eclipses any of the Marches that we had in this 4-year period and really any March before. So that is a good thing. We also saw a big surge in closings and sold properties from the year before. That has to do maybe a little bit with a hangover from the storms, from the elections, etc. But really a very robust start to 2026. We also see, if you look up at the top of the chart, you can see that although inventory has increased dramatically from 2022, we're about 20% less inventory on the market right now than at this time last year. So even though we have a bit more supply probably than we need on the market at the moment, it's not quite as excessive as it was last year. And so that leads us into our second slide, which is going to look at through the whole market, what has been going on with the average price per square foot of sold properties. And what we can see from this chart, again, if you look further to the right-hand side, you can see that our price per square foot is up probably about 10 to 12% from this time in 2025, but generally down approximately, let's say somewhere between 8 and 12% if you kind of look at the higher market times in 2022, 2023. And then when you see some real spikes in 2024, a lot of that was St. Regis and some other big condo projects that had lots of closings that kind of pushed that average price up, so it skewed the stats. But if you kind of draw a straight line or a gentle curve, you can see that there's just a little bit of an easing in the average price per square foot that has taken place, and I really don't think that's a surprise, but it just gives you a little bit of an insight into what's going on in pricing. With that, another really big change that we've seen from a few years ago to this year is that the average days on market right now for a listing in Sarasota County is 94 days. And I think if you're a buyer or a seller, I think that's a really important number to look at and to set expectations by. A lot of times I meet with sellers and they say, we want to be out of here in a month, 2 months, and that is just not necessarily the velocity of the overall market that we're in. Each market has little nuances to it that may change that, but on average, we're now over 90 days. And also, the average price that all listings across Sarasota County are closing for versus their initial listing price is 90%. So think about that. That maybe not sound so bad, but if you have a listing that you priced at $1 million, on average, the final sale price for that listing is $900,000, which is a pretty big difference when you start to quantify it that way. Now, the average for listings selling based on their current listing price, so not their initial price, so a lot of times we reduce the price of a listing if it's unsold. The current list price to sale price ratio is 94%. So I think that's an important thing to clue into if you're a buyer. Buyers are reading a lot of press that may be focused nationally or not specifically in this market or on the Barrier Islands, and they may be wanting to make very aggressive offers. Well, keep in mind kind of the average wiggle room on a property is roughly 6% of the price, but also that means that there are several that are selling for higher than that ratio. So a well-priced, properly presented listing in our market is still getting very close, within a couple percentage points or maybe even close to full asking, with a few exceptions even going over asking for the right property. So let's keep trying to talk a little bit about pricing. Again, understanding that this is a total generality for our whole market. Again, Bird Key is going to be different than Lakewood Ranch. It's going to be different than Palmer Ranch. It's going to be different than Siesta Key. So keep in mind, these are just generalities. But generally speaking, if you look at this slide, the top line in green is the average price of a property that is for sale in our market area. And the red line is the actual price of what they are selling for on average. So I'm less concerned with the top line because in our market, as a luxury destination, we do have a lot of higher priced properties. In fact, several listings now over 10 million, several even over 20, and you start to see into the 30s on occasion. So one listing at that price can greatly skew this average, but the average price right now for an active listing in our market is just over $1 million, and our average sold price in March of 2026 is $636,000. And again, taking out kind of the St. Regis effect in this graph, if you look, you can see that we were surging well up into the 700s, almost to 750 in 2023 is kind of our average. And now we've settled about 3 to 5% lower on average than we saw in 2022 and 23. And again, a big bump up from 2025. So pricing is kind of mirroring price per square foot. We saw a real slowdown in 2025, a bit of a bounce back this year, but we're still below pandemic era levels. The key thing to remember about all this pricing though, is that if you purchased your house, I would say maybe in early 2021 or 2020 and sooner, you are sitting most likely on tremendous equity. So when we talk about these prices coming down, this was probably something that needed to happen for affordability and for the market to continue to grow. And really the only people that are seeing a bit of negative equity are going to be the people that purchased in 22, 23, and maybe 24. So now we're looking at months of inventory, and the way that we compute this is based on how many listings are available, how many sold last month, and if no new listings came on the market, how long would it take us to completely run out of listings? And based on the amount of pending sales that we had in February in our market, that number might surprise you. It's 4.3 months. So the National Association of Realtors says, and I've told you this a million times, is that a balanced market is roughly 6 months of supply. And so based actually on this statistic, it would say that our market actually favors a seller, that we don't quite have as much supply as you might think. But if you back up 1 or 2 months and you take out the big March that we had, if you look at January or February, the averages are up to 6.5, maybe 7 months. And so generally what I would say that we're seeing is between 5.5 and 6.5 months of inventory on average, which truly is that kind of balanced market that we talk about. And The great part about that is I think we're seeing some improvements in our market. The hard part about that is determining really who has the power. Generally speaking, it's more of a buyer's market, but there are segments of the market where that's not the case. We're continually seeing properties that have multiple offers. We're seeing, for the right price, the right condition, the right spot, multiple buyers for certain types of listings. So it's really not as straightforward as you might think, which is why I obviously recommend a professional to help you interpret the market conditions. On average, kind of 6 months of inventory is the norm at the moment. So if you look at the next slide, this was put out by the Stellar MLS, which you can see it shows kind of this whole big highlighted cross-section of Florida, which the dark part represents the MLS that we're a member of, which isn't really anything you should be concerned about other than that gives a good cross-section of kind of the middle of the state of Florida. And I'm always interested to see how our regional stats stack up to what's going on more broadly in the state. And it's kind of very similar. We're up in pending sales across the market area. We are up about 5% year over year in sales, 32% month over month in terms of kind of that March spring surge. Sales volume is up 8%, and the average sale price is up about 3% year over year and flat from a month ago. We're also seeing statewide a decrease in inventory, down 15% from a year ago. So very similar numbers kind of on the macro trend. Pricing is different, but that is generally what's going on in Florida. So now let's try to drill down a little bit. Again, everything in this report is very broad. And again, if you want a specific Russell recap just for your property, if you want to know about your market, how your property stands up to what's going on around it, I would be happy to do a private consultation to let you know. But let's shift our focus now and let's look at the luxury market. And so the way I'm going to define luxury is not going to be a specific finish. It's going to be by pricing. So that's really the only way we can do it here. And now we're going to say that a luxury home is priced $3 million and up in our market. So if you look at this chart, you will notice fairly alarming amount of inventory in the high end. We have now approaching over 400 listings in the county that are priced over $3 million, which is different than the overall inventory trend that we saw across the market. You saw a dip in inventory from 2025 in the regular market, and you still see the inventory going up in the luxury market, which is telling. What you also see that I think is very telling is the highest level of pending sales, $3 million and up, that we've seen in quite some time. In fact, if you look at the little red line bumping along the bottom of the graph, you see that our pending sales over 3 million are up substantially over a year ago, up 77% actually, and up 7% month over month from February of 26. So quite a bit of activity in the upper end, although if you look at it, significant inventory. And if you'd like to know the average days on market for over $3 million, that average jumps from 94 days to 145 days in the luxury market. And the average sale price is 86% of the original listing price. So again, information to keep in mind when you're thinking about selling and thinking about how you position your property in the market. All in all, I would have to say that we've had some really nice momentum going into the beginning of 2026. In fact, things were actually really starting to get cooking. And just like last year around this time, if you remember, we had tariffs, which threw everybody for a loop and threw financial markets into turmoil. This year we have what? The geopolitical event of the war in Iran. And now every person in the world knows what the Strait of Hormuz is, and probably nobody knew that a couple of months ago. And if you look at this chart, what I see here is you see a beautiful trend of lowering mortgage interest rates going back to the beginning of 2025, where we were firmly entrenched in the sevens, and a really nice pattern going down all the way below 6%. So we dropped a whole point of interest over the year 2025, which was really hard to do. And then we had the Iran war begin, and rates jumped almost 10% to 6.6%. So we were getting some great momentum, and that really For buyers that are really counting their pennies, trying to make ends meet, that was a very negative event. However, we're starting to see things ease again. But what happens with mortgage rates, as you can see in this chart, is they jump up really quick and they kind of go down slowly. So the long-term forecasts are still to get back more towards that 6% range. And I'm seeing several mortgages close in the fives, upper 5%. So they're out there if you shop carefully. So with all this data, I've given you a lot of numbers and stats and figures. What are the key takeaways? So I have a few. The first key takeaway to remember, and I think I hinted at this earlier, is that our market is very segmented. So I didn't get into the difference between condominiums and single family homes, for example. The condominium market has a bit more pressure on it than single family homes. So if we were to take all this data and compare the two, you would see the number for homes are looking a little bit stronger than condominiums. Is it a buyer's market or a seller's market? Well, again, I think generally speaking, it's more of a buyer favoring market, but there are certain segmented parts of the market that favor sellers. It is all about the specific market that you're in and the data for that market. As prices continue to moderate somewhat, what I'm reminding sellers is that if you've owned the property a long period of time, you still have tremendous equity. And what I'm reminding buyers is that we are seeing some really great opportunities. Some of the purchases that we've helped with in this first quarter, specifically a couple of different waterfront purchases, were bought at prices that I think were unimaginable a few years ago. And I think, other than pre-COVID, this is the best opportunity that we have seen to pick up significant pieces of property in the Sarasota County and Manatee County market. So there is a bit of an opportunity out there for the upper end buyers for significant properties. The other thing I'll say is that there is a huge trend of wealth continuing to move into Florida. Several notable billionaires relocating to Miami due to kind of tax status purposes. A lot of people that are retiring from the West and Northeast that are relocating and making Florida their primary residence, which is going to continue to help stimulate Florida in a unique way as opposed to other parts of the US. So overall, the outlook going forward is we need to be very smart on our pricing. It's a great time to be a strategic buyer and capture a great value. But overall, the market probably is not as broken as the media is telling you. The right property, the right price is having no trouble moving. And I think our March with over 1,500 pending sales in Sarasota County is evidence to exactly that. So I hope this information is helpful to you. Again, if you have any specific questions, feel free to reach out, and thank you for watching.